Well, this is Ms. Kriya Shortt. She's the president and CEO of TEXTRON eAviation. She's been with us for 2 days now, so we're really excited to have her here. She was accompanied by two of her colleagues, the chief legal counsel and the director of finance. So it was our last 2 days, and I've got some questions.
Yeah, great. Absolutely.
Ready to go? So the first question is, how did you go from your first position in TEXTRON to becoming the CEO of TEXTRON eAviation?
I mean, it's been a long journey, so we've got a while. I think it's probably important just to kind of ground and kind of continue, right? So you kind of hopefully it helps kind of tell the story. So, I didn't expect to end up in aerospace, so I love your story that you got your degree and it wasn't necessarily where you thought you wanted to go. The same thing happened to me. So I went to school at a small liberal arts college down in southern Missouri, and I studied French and added education to it because I thought I wanted to teach at the collegiate level. And actually started down a path where I got an acceptance to do a master's in French with a teaching assistantship would have helped me fulfill that that dream. But I married young, and my husband was pursuing his master's at a different university, and ultimately I decided I didn't love the curricula enough to warrant kind of having to go separate ways for a period of time. And so I stayed the course and finished all of my post-bac work to get certified to teach K-12 French. And then my husband got a degree, or his degree was in aviation. And so his job, I followed him to Wichita, Kansas, and because he got a job at Cessna Aircraft. And here I am now, I completed my degree in 3.5 years, bless you.
Thank you.
And then did my post-bac work for a year. So 4.5 years through school, and I have the paper, but I don't have the passion. And I'm like, this is a problem, right? And so how am I going to rectify this? So I started looking at all these things that I could do. Should I go back and take a couple of course loads and go sit for the MCATs? Should I go into commercial leasing and lending? Should I go into, pursued my private pilot certificate, so I'm like, maybe I should go be a first officer for the Air Guard. These are crazy thoughts. And ultimately, I had this private pilot certificate, and so as I'm looking for jobs, I responded to one at Cessna Aircraft Company that was on the airport, and it was for being part of their flying club, basically managing their scheduling, which was all done on paper at the time, so that just tells you how old I am. But it was a phenomenal opportunity. I got the job. It was $9.25 per hour, and my friends were like, why are you taking that job for $9.25 an hour? You've got a college degree. I'm like, because I need a job. I got bills to pay. But it was the best thing ever because, internships really didn't exist when I was going through college. And so it gave me this opportunity to just talk to a lot of people. And I learned through that job that I didn't have to be an engineer, I didn't have to be a professional pilot, and I didn't have to be a maintainer to be able to find my way into a company to be able to bring value. And so, I always like to say I was the luckiest girl in the world that happened. And so I just interviewed people for a year and kind of started understanding what I might like to do. And so I took my first real kind of aviation-focused job in an inside sales role. Do you all know what an inside sales is? Basically, I'm sitting in the office, I'm interacting with customers, but they're already our customers. So I'm expanding the share of wallet that we receive with them. And I had never been in a sales job, and I kind of loved it. I loved that the company trusted me to be able to talk with their customers. I got to learn their stories. And I looked out across the organization, and I'm kind of a challenge junkie. And I thought, well, what could I do next? Maybe I could someday sell airplanes, which was like a bombastic thought because all of the people who sold airplanes were all, and I'm not a big feminist, it's just a fact, they were all just white males. And so I had really great mentors that I was able to have conversations with, and I kind of spoke into the universe, hey, I'd like to do this. And they said, here are the things that you need to kind of close the gaps on to be able to have that opportunity or present yourself with the opportunity to compete for that. And so I just systematically went to closing those gaps, right? And the journey was long, but 10 years into my career, I had that opportunity to sell airplanes. And for me, I'm a really structured person, and I like to have a plan. So for me, crafting my own career has been super important. And I did that. I did that all the way up through that sales role, but getting that sales role, if I could just convey how hard it really was to get it, I didn't have a plan beyond that. It was like, I'm gonna bask in the sun of having this achievement, and then we're gonna have to figure it out. And so I sold airplanes for a few years and really still didn't have clarity on what next would look like. And then there's always going to be things in your life and in your career that will impact you that are outside factors, geopolitical, economic downturns, things like that. And so this was all coming to kind of like a head. I was ready to do something different, but also it was like at the tail end of the 2008 sort of economic crisis. So nobody's going to raise their hand and say, I'm bored, I want to do something different. I was just happy to have, employment. And so I just continued to do my very best to sell as many airplanes as I could through that environment. And then somebody, one of my mentors, tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, we're going to expand the sales organization. We're looking for people to take leadership roles. Would you be interested in leading a regional sales team? And for me, it was a no-brainer. To be honest, and I think it's important to be honest, I had never had a thought about being a leader. Like nobody had ever said, hey, when you're, have you ever thought about it? Until it happened, right? And then so I had no formal training, but I said yes, because I like challenges, and I'm like, we'll figure it out. So I took that opportunity, and I did my very best, and I learned on the fly, and I did get some formal training from the company, which is super helpful. And what that taught me was, that you can stretch into next roles even if you aren't necessarily perceived as ready for it, but you're going to have to do a lot of hard work and heavy lifting for that. And I also never wanted to be in a situation that I didn't know what next looked like again. And so 4 months into leading this team as a fledgling leader, the CEO of the company, I happened to be interacting with him, said, so what do you want to do next? And in my head, I thought, that is the most bizarre question you could possibly ask me. I've only been doing this for 4 months. I haven't proven myself. Don't you want me to be really show you that I can do this before I start thinking about next? But what came out of my mouth, because I guess I'm probably slightly opportunistic and don't mind putting a challenge out there, was I'd like to run Europe, Middle East, and Africa someday, if that's an opportunity. Well, I didn't know. But 2 months later, the gentleman who was running Europe, Middle East, and Africa resigned from the role. And I got a call from HR that said, are you sitting down? Would you like to go do this? Again, I was not ready. Let's be clear. I would not encourage you on the journey I took, but it's been my path. So now, 6 months into being a leader, I find myself on the senior leadership team at Cessna Aircraft. And I'm leading a region of the world through kind of a transformational shift in how we're going to do business. And so my family moved to Europe, which was phenomenal, and I learned a lot. I knew the team, so some consistencies in this theme of this journey of growth was I always knew the team and the people that I was leading, and I often knew the customers as well. And I was of some sort, form, or fashion a subject matter expert in the field that I was leading in, right? So it was always reaching and overstretching me, but also there were some aspects that kind of tethered me into being comfortable. Again, once I got that role, I guess I felt super empowered because I said I'd love to take this role, but ultimately this is a short-term assignment because I was an expat, so basically I was an American being paid to be in Europe to do this thing, and the course of it was going to be a maximum of 3 years. I said, look, if after I do this, if I do this well. We were kind of a disparate sales team, so the regions reported into the CEO. I said I'd like the opportunity to be the global sales leader and bring all those leaders back together if I do this successfully. Well, 6 months into that stretch assignment, the North American sales leader resigned. And so I got a call from the CEO this time that said, hey, I'd like you to be the global sales leader. And so again, now I'm stretch on stretch on stretch, right? And I did. I took that opportunity, and so I went from being a frontline leader to being a global sales leader literally in a period of 14 months. We can talk about kind of how that worked well and how it didn't work well, but I had that role for about 5 years, and that then told me, you are capable, and you're capable of doing more if you want to go close those gaps again. And so the gaps I knew I needed to close were really around profit and loss, budget, ownership, not, when you're in sales, you're definitely accountable for profit, but, being able to manage a budget, operations, I'd never done any sort of operational work, and leading engineering. And so, I reflected within myself and thought, if I'm going to stretch again, how do I stretch? And so at this point, I'm reporting to the CEO, and I said, hey, someday I'd love the opportunity, because I want to continue to learn and grow, to run our services network. And so after 5 years of doing global sales, I got that opportunity, which I did for 4 years. And then right before COVID, I was asked to move into our parts and distribution organization, which is really kind of obviously a distribution model. You do touch customers in a transactional manner, but it's really like an e-commerce and supply chain role. So it stretched me again. So all of those points of experience, stretching, sometimes succeeding, sometimes failing, we should talk about that if you have any questions, prepared me as best as possible and positioned me to be able to have the opportunity to lead a business segment. And it was a combination of people who invested in me along the way, as well as me stating what I really wanted to do and being willing to hear what I didn't yet know to work on, to be able to position myself to have that chance.
Very interesting. Sure.
Yeah, it's been a ride. It's been I've been 29 years.
Absolutely.
I've been loyal to the same parent company all 29 years. So 27 years we're at TEXTRON Aviation, and I've sat in this role as the segment head for 2 years.
So of course, apart from the CEO and without mentioning your names, of course, who are the most pivotal people in your journey?
Yeah, the funny,
mentors,
yeah, so many. Probably one of the most pivotal persons who wouldn't even know they were part of my story was my first supervisor, because when I got my first promotion, he made this comment, and it's funny that it stuck with me. He meant it super positively, but when I say it, you'll be like, oh, I get it. So when I went in and told him that I had gotten this next opportunity, he goes, well, everybody's replaceable. And I was like, wow, that's what he intended to say was, we never expect you to stay here super long, right? That would have been the more kind way of saying it, but he wasn't a super sophisticated communicator. And after many years later, he actually apologized for the way he said it to me. I mean, when somebody says something like that to you, whether it's for the positive or the negative, it sticks with you, right? And so I think that was super impactful, if I'm honest, because to 29 years later, I still remember that exact pivotal moment, and it drives me every day to be the best person I can be, to ensure that I'm never that person who's replaceable. But then beyond that, I would say it's the people who opened up space to me and allowed me to be vulnerable, to tell them the things that I wanted to achieve. And sometimes those were superiors in the sales organization who helped me close those technical gaps. Sometimes it's been trusted peers who, if you have a leadership gap, which you will have because we're all human, who are accountable to me, and I'm accountable to them, to say, like, look, you did not show up as your best person today, right? And so everybody needs to know that, because there's what you intend, and then there's what happens. And so I would say intent and impact, and those aren't always in alignment, because you're in your own head, but how you, just like that guy said to me, everybody's replaceable. There was his intent, and there was the impact of what he said to me, and they were vastly different. And I've had great mentors in the industry as well. And then I have to say, last but not least, and I will name them, which is my husband. He is the aerospace professional in our family, and yet, at a point in time where our careers were both kind of at this inflection point, he said, you know what, you are super passionate, you're super driven. I'm going to take a step back, and I'm going to support you. And I'm going to support and make sure that, we have 2 kids who are now adults, but I'm going to make sure that our familial unit stays intact, that you get to do everything you want to do professionally, and yet we still have a vibrant home life. And I'm proud to say we've been married for 31 years this summer.
So you've heard the saying that leaders are born, not made.
Yeah.
Of course, that's debatable.
Okay.
But what are your leadership? What's your leadership approach, and what are your qualities of a leader?
Yeah. Well, I do think there's biases in people that cause them to want to be leaders versus followers. And I think that at the end of the day, the best leaders are able to enable followership. And so that means to me that the traits of how you show up as a leader are super important. And so for me, I would put that right up there first, of being having empathy and being humble, right? I mean, if you can't code those 2 things as key traits of a leader, you're going to be limited in what you can approach. But you also have to be action-oriented. You have to be curious. You have to be decisive. You have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And every one of us are unique, right? We all have our own personalities, our own traits, and our own both strengths and opportunities, right? And a strength can become a weakness if it's overused, and you know, an opportunity or a weakness can be compensated for, or also developed into maybe not a strength, but at least something that isn't an opportunity. And so I would say my bias is towards action orientation. I'm highly opinionated and driven. And so so bottom line up front, as a type A person, right? And I like to be in control. So all of those things are good things, but if they don't if they show up in a way that stifles my team, they're not good things. They actually inhibit the team. And that is the one thing that almost derailed my career when I got into leadership. So when I talked about being the leader, being the sales organization, I was a subject matter expert. I was respected, therefore I was followed, right? When I stepped into my first role outside of my subject matter expertise, customer service, I mean, I sat down with my team and I said, look, here's who I am, here's how you can expect me to show up. I process really quickly, I'm gonna ask a ton of questions, I'm a verbal processor, I give a lot of feedback, right? And so I felt like I had divulged what you can expect. My failure was not to say, how do you like to be led, right? Here's who I am, deal with me, right? And what happened was I had a senior leader on my team who came in and sat down into my office about probably 4 months into this tenure and says, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, and he just rattled off these things. And in my head, I was like, well, I told you all these things. But again, it was intent and impact, right? And so I had to acknowledge that how I was leading him was not working. And then you're going to get the benefit of feedback as you go through your career. Nobody expects you to be perfect. Leaders aren't perfect, and you are always going to be in growth, right? And so I was enrolled in a course where I got the opportunity to get 360 review. And what I got was even some of my prior direct reports actually said the same things. They're like, hey, we respect you. We don't always like how you led us. And so that holds up this big ugly mirror that says, it's not you, it's me. And you know, part of it was, you know, how you're led. You might lead because you pick up traits from people, you know, but that's not an excuse, it's just an acknowledgement. And at the end of the day, if I was going to continue to be successful, if I was going to have the opportunity to step into the C-suite, you know, yeah, I had to continue to do technical learning, but if I couldn't do personal learning and leadership learning, it wasn't going to make a hill of beans of difference. I wasn't going to get there. Because what happens as a leader is your number one job is to attract and retain and grow talent. And if you're not able to do that, you're not going to be successful. So again, when I say humility, it's important. I just stepped up to the plate and ate a big old pile of humble pie and said, I'm so sorry that that's what happened. That wasn't my intent. That doesn't really matter. But like, here's what I'm going to do. And it was a multi-year journey to recraft my personal brand. So if you want to lead in the course of your career, you know, take every opportunity. I didn't know I wanted to be a CEO. You might know you want to be a CEO. You might know you want to be a leader. Every chance you have to lead at a peer level, in civic life, in your home, whatever it looks like, you're expanding that brand and you're getting to really learn who you are and to try things on for size before you have a negative impact on the team. And what would have been most impactful is if that leader had not given me that feedback and had left the company, right? And so, you know, I thanked him. I thanked him for being so transparent with me because, you know, if you can't have that feedback, then you can't grow. And that's where I talk about, you know, failure, right? Mm-hmm. You know, failure is just an opportunity to check and adjust. And so unless it's illegal, amoral, or unethical, it's probably survivable if you're willing to really do the work on it. It's not easy, and it's not fun, but it can be done.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, in fact, because attracting and retaining talent is probably one of the chief objectives of any leader.
Yeah.
So, and of course with that comes failure too.
Yeah.
So
I mean, we're just humans,
we're
right?
just human, exactly.
I mean, you're in a leadership role. We all get up every single day.
Exactly.
We put on our pants.
Exactly.
We have range. You have a bad hair day.
But
Everybody expects you to show up
of course,
on your best self.
That's
yeah.
right, of course. So keeping this in mind, what advice would you give our students for career growth?
Yeah, I would say, like, just don't be afraid of leaning into that space that's not comfortable, right? There's a difference between being under stress and being uncomfortable. But your biggest, in my experience and in watching others as well, your biggest opportunity for growth is when you're in a little bit of discomfort, because it does cause you to think and surround yourself with support in a different way than when you're operating within your zone of kind of comfort, right? And I would say, don't be afraid to take risks. There's a difference between taking a smart risk and being foolhardy, right? So, and don't be afraid of failure. There's a difference between failure and mistakes. Mistakes are careless, and they happen repeatedly. Failure is usually born out of good intent, and again, is an acknowledgement that, holy cow, something has went terribly awry, and what are we going to do to make sure that that doesn't happen again?
And switching gears now, so from a corporate perspective, without divulging too much proprietary information, what are any special projects which TEXTRON is working on these days, and where do you see them going?
Yeah. So I came from TEXTRON Aviation, which is the home of Cessna, Beechcraft, and Hawker, right, as a legacy brand, which is where I spent 27 years building my industry expertise. And then when I was asked to take over the eAviation leadership role, it's an adjacent space because it's all about emerging technologies. And so we're really focused on enabling technologies that can be kind of building blocks together to either better products that are in service today or transform products into things like unmanned cargo drones or surveillance and reconnaissance that is also unmanned, or electric flight, which Embry-Riddle's got a Bell's Electro on its flight line. So a lot of different enabling technologies, which definitely has me out of my comfort zone.
So, and again, continuing on the corporate topic. So, of course, the aviation industry is global in nature, and most companies are global, like TEXTRON. So, how do you look at collaboration? What does collaboration look like when you're dealing with a global workforce?
Yeah, I mean, so our team have operations based in Wichita, which is where I live. So I'm in the central time zone. But my biggest operational facility is based actually partially in Slovenia and part in Italy, but both 7 hours ahead of me. And then we have an engineering office in Munich, Germany as well, right? And so we're a small team. We're about 520 people total, largely European, either Slovenian, Italian, German, but also global. So because of the type of work that we do in emerging technologies, Pipistrel, which is the Slovenian-based company, draws global talent, as does our Munich team, which is doing fly-by-wire technology. So we have folks from South Africa, we have folks from India, we have folks from Brazil, from Argentina, from Mexico, all other places within the EU that kind of flock to be part of this engineering kind of prowess. So, you're working against the clock, you're also working with a lot of different cultures. And actually I was having lunch with some of the student leaders here, and they said, well, what's the difference between doing business with a European customer and a US customer? And I would submit with respect that you can't even quantify it that way, because while the EU exists and that drives regulatory and governmental policies as well as currency similarity, each country has its unique identity and still very much identifies with its own country, not as part of the EU. So it means understanding that Germans are very much business up front, and there's not a lot, you're going to talk about a lot of business stuff, and there's a gap between talking about business stuff before you will ever know who they are personally, if ever, right? Whereas if you're dealing with Italians, I mean, it's a bit stereotypical, but imagine it. I mean, it's very, very effusive and emotive and very personal, right? And so you're kind of got those ends of the curve. And then you've got the bell in the middle, which is more or less where everybody operates. So we span not only cultures, but we also deal with EASA regulatory bodies. That's as Pipistrel, we certify under EASA, but most of our U.S. engineers think as an FAA mindset. And there are even differences there. So we really foster, one, having a strong mission, vision, and values, right? Values so that everybody has a common language that they operate under. So our values are pretty simple. People first, integrity always, collaborative mindset, and evolve with purpose. Because you don't want to give somebody like a whole handbook of how they operate. But if I'm in a meeting with you and you don't know me, at least if things don't go well, you can come back to your leader and say, hey, that meeting did not go well because so-and-so and such really didn't exhibit a collaborative mindset. Or, honestly, when you said that, my feelings got hurt. And so you need a framework to be able to kind of have these conversations. So I think that's important. Even so, it's still really easy to talk past each other because we're reliant on operating in a Teams environment or over emails. And so you have to be cognizant of that, and you have to make sure that as a leader, you're really trying to continue to force and foster, two-way communication, real time, and always looking for that feedback loop.
So I would like to open it up for questions from you guys.
Yeah.
Okay. In aviation industry, there is very few female leaders like you, and so what is the difference as this top level about this situation?
Yeah. Well, I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged by the fact that I'm sitting here with a small population, which is 50-50, right? So that gives me hope. And I can only speak from my own experience, right? I think the industry is evolving, and I can say that 50-50, and I can also acknowledge that it's not 50-50 yet. If you look across kind of like some of the business function areas, there are places where it absolutely approaches that, where you've got more parity today in finance roles. HR roles are actually over-indexed in the female, typically speaking. And then in some of the support functions, you see more and more women. Engineering is still more male dominated, but the shift is occurring, and so what drives that? It drives it culturally at the company level, being intentional about creating opportunities for everybody, because when you create opportunities that are balanced, everybody has the opportunity to win. But it also ensures understanding what those differences are and making sure that your ecosystem is supportive. So a couple of years ago, in probably 2018, Congress, the U.S. Congress, mandated to the FAA by law, they introduced legislation that they wanted the formation of a Women in Aviation Advisory Board to understand why there wasn't equity in aviation. So in 2020, it was enacted, I guess in 2019 it was enacted into law, and then the FAA had a certain amount of time to actually get the board up and running. And I got to serve as one of 32 candidates across the industry. So we had academia present, we had defense present, we had airlines present, we had maintenance represented, we had airports represented, air traffic control, and OEMs, and I was the least of, trust me, at this, so these were phenomenally gifted women who all came together and really used data to understand where the parity gaps were, and then collectively recommended to the Department of Transportation and the FAA 65 things that could be done, and that was what our responsibility was. But we also, from an industry perspective, took the opportunity to reflect on it and say, what could industry be doing differently as well? So I think that it's changing, it's shifting. And I know it is, because whereas I was the first woman who sold for Cessna Aircraft in 2007, think about that. That's mind-blowing, right? Today, there's a much more diverse sales organization at TEXTRON Aviation, and I can personally see the benefit, because what took me 10 years to achieve, I'm seeing young professionals have opportunity in 12 months to go out as sales associates. They're not responsible for the territory, but they're not spending 10 years learning before we ever let them do. And there are many women that are a part of that. So.
Go ahead.
You mentioned some of the core values at TEXTRON and Cessna. What's one aspect of the culture that stands out for you?
Yeah. Look, I've been part of our values. I just gave you our values. Obviously TEXTRON has values. TEXTRON Aviation has values. It's not a mistake that they all sound similar. right? And so, I think probably the one that, so to me, we have integrity always, TEXTRON Aviation has be trustworthy. To me, that's just table stakes. Like, you have to have it, you have to say it because it's super important and it's absolutely expected, right? So I don't want to throw that one to the side, but to me, you don't even get to have a culture if you can't have that. So for me, probably the one that I think is, that really encapsulates the most is really around the be collaborative, because nothing happens in a vacuum, right? If you're studying finance, if you're studying IT, if you're studying engineering, if you're looking to go into customer support or service or sales, you're never going to be successful in any of those functions without a network. And so understanding how to operate within a team and an ecosystem, to me is a differentiator. I love that Evolve with Purpose is ours because kind of as a startup, we're pivoting and adjusting because technologies do or don't play out, and we're still becoming. So I love the fact that we can demonstrate that we're willing to change as well.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like obviously, like career advancement and an increase in compensation is important, but what are some of your like intrinsic motivations to kind of jump off the deep end and like be willing to try new things even if there isn't like a guarantee that like light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, and I think that's a super personal question, right? Because what's right for me may not be right for you, and I think it starts with that is understand what your own tolerance level is, what your own situation is, and what you're going to be, where is your line, right? Your red line between comfort and discomfort, or discomfort and stress, more importantly, right? Because operating in stress is not necessarily good for anybody, right? For me, that red line is super, super close to the stress line. I'm like that, but that's just because that's how I'm wired. I would tell you that as a human, I'm a challenge junkie. Like, I don't want to die, but like if you tell me something can't be done, I want to figure out how to do it, right? Or if it's really, really hard and gritty, I'm going to get in there and roll around with it and be successful at it. But that's not how everybody is wired. And the quote that sticks out with me was actually an executive from Delta who was on a panel, and she's like, not everybody wants to be a pioneer. Some people just want to be sellers, right? So yeah, I was willing to be the pioneer, to go be the first person to sell airplanes. It's shameful that it took so long, but at the end of the day, doing that kind of pierced the veil, and so it's not easy. You still have to prove yourself and work really hard, but it's also saying, hey, it doesn't have to just be this certain way. So I think my first advice would be know where your own personal risk tolerance is, and where you feel like you're going to go from being uncomfortable to I'm completely stressed out, because that's not good from a mental health perspective. Yeah. Second to that, I would say know what your passions are, and they can change over time. And they might be super narrow in some respects, like, I wanted to be in sales, right? Today I would tell you I'm not in sales, but I sell every single day. I sell ideas, I sell vision, I sell product, right? All these different things. But I've given myself elasticity over time, so I have 5 buckets, and I try to the best of my ability to keep those buckets in balance. And so when I make decisions, I'm looking at how full are those 5 buckets. And and can I, even if a bucket, if it doesn't look like it's obviously full, how do I think about that? So I used to say customers were super important to me. When I moved into the parts organization, I realized that's a super transactional relationship, and I'm going to get to talk with my customers, but if I'm looking to my customers to fill my bucket, I'm probably going to be disappointed. And so I really reflected a lot about that, and I changed it to relationships. Relationships are what matter to me. With my team, with my customers, with my family, with my peers. And so how do I keep that bucket in check, right? So know what those passions are that drive you. Every once in a while, take stock and see if those buckets are the same, or if they need to be expanded or emptied, and keep the ones that serve you well. Because then you kind of are grounded in why you make your decisions.
Great.
Yeah.
Any questions from our aviation folks here?
I guess I know your intent wasn't to start going into sales, but what kind of got you to keep on going in that path? Was it just that you saw you were good at it and you really enjoyed that, or was there something behind it that
Yeah.
where you were like, this is what I guess I want to do
I
that?
think it was a couple of things, right? I think there, I mean, if I'm honest, that the idea of doing something that nobody else like me had ever done before was absolutely a driver, but it wasn't like a driver in the absence of anything else. The foundation of it was, you know, I can still remember my very first customer interaction at Cessna Aircraft, and I'd been in my role for like 3 weeks, and I got to sit down and try and promote my programs to a customer. And they told me their story, and it would be really easy to think that if you're buying a jet, it's because you're like super wealthy and, you know, you want to, you know, do all these things or whatever. But the story was this. This was a family business that had started in their basement, and it was in the mid-90s. You won't know this, but you maybe if you ever visit your grandma's house or something, you'd see it there. There were like these kerosene lamps. They were clear, and then you could like put colored kerosene in them for decoration and whatnot. That's what these people did. And they'd started in their basement, and they had gotten a contract with Walmart. And Walmart's really tough. So when Walmart tells you to be there, you're going to be there. And these guys, their family were based in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin. Not exactly a well-served place, right? And so they were buying their business jet. They had been successful enough to earn business with Walmart and now needed a productivity tool so that they could keep that business in their team. And so that was my first experience. But that wasn't my only experience. What I learned over the course of time was I love learning the stories of our customers. And I cannot think of an industry that I could have been in. I mean, I've been in the craziest places, right? I've eaten cheese right out of the Belgioioso, you know, cheese vats. I've seen, you know, if you're the kind of the convenience store pastries, Bon Appetit. I've been in their bakeries with them. I know the guy that has the patent on the vacuum seal to seal like coffee so that it retains its freshness. And I just like to learn, right? So sales connected to me to this infinite industry learning that I could be exposed to without actually doing those jobs. So between the customers, between the learning, and the challenge, that's what really motivated me to keep going. And then the encouragement that I received from my mentor, right?
That's good. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Also, you said that you thought for a while, like, about doing a first office, and you also got your private license. What made you, like, not follow this path?
Yeah, I think know your why, right? So the part of the story that I didn't tell you was how I got connected to general aviation in the first place. When I was 15 years old, my parents were missionaries, and we moved from central Missouri to West Africa, where I got kind of like pulled out of my nuclear family and dropped in a boarding school. And every 4 to 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, I would go home, and my transportation home was a Cessna 206 with a Loran in it. And you can't change your DNA. So as a 15-year-old who didn't really want to be there, who was kind of a challenger, some might say rebellious, you know, I can distinctly remember just standing there next to our bush pilot, and he's like weighing everything, putting in the airplane, and go, maybe I'm gonna be a bush pilot when I grow up. And you know what he said to me? He just looked at me, and he goes, well, you know, you have to lift a lot of really heavy stuff. And I thought, I can't tell you what I thought, because I'm sure it wasn't very nice. But I just filed that away. Like I really had no intent to be a bush pilot. I just wanted to get a reaction out of him. But his response kind of fueled like this wick in me to think, well, screw you, I'm gonna go become a pilot someday maybe, right? And I just filed it away, and maybe nothing would have come of it, but then I went to this small liberal arts school, which also had a 4-year aviation program at the time that I went to it. And I didn't pursue the aviation program because it wasn't necessarily a passion, but I pursued this aviator. And so it became a passion. So after, you know, in my senior year, as I had time in my schedule, I was like, oh, there's this thing. Why don't I just take this opportunity now to get my private pilot certificate and show the world that I can? And so I did. So that my why wasn't super strong. So I was never super confident throughout my private pilot training. I was never super confident as a pilot. When I moved to Wichita, I did start down. I took my instrument written. My biggest regret in my life is that I didn't freaking complete my flight training, because now I have to go back and do my instrument again. But you know, but I also then decided to have a baby, and so I wasn't having fun with it, so I just kind of shelved it. So you have to know your why. Like I did it because it was a challenge, not because it was a passion. After being in the industry for a number of years, like it was super helpful though, because I understood. It helped me have a basis to understand kind of systems, and I went out and spent a lot of time learning about systems on jets. It helped me when I was in the cockpit because I sold Part 23 jets, so most of my owners were owner pilots. And so even though I wasn't type rated, I still understood the physics of it. I was a pilot, and that gave me, some level of respect for having done a thing. I actually got back in the cockpit for the first time in 26 years last fall, and started flying it. It is not like riding a bike. It is not, no. I mean, the things I've learned about myself is, I now understand my why. I lead a company that does, create product, and I would like to be able to firsthand fly that product. I picked a flight instructor with whom I'm super comfortable, and I can be authentic. So versus when I was doing my instrument, I had the chief engineer of the single engine, and I would say things like I'd execute a perfect pull to be like, great job, and I'm like, I have no idea where I am. And he would just look at me like, what's wrong with you, right? And I was like, a lot. But I have really good communication flow with my current instructor. And steep turns are kicking my butt. I can't do them to standards, and I don't know why. And then I got busy, and I haven't flown for the last 9 months. So I feel like my passion to do it is different now, not only because of what I do, but also my husband really built a kit build. We built an RV7. And so I don't ever want to fly our airplane, but I also think, again, when you're reinvesting into these relationships, when I retire, we're going to fly a lot. So I'd like to be able to be proficient.
I have one more question about the marketing.
Yeah.
Like USA right now, the business jet market, I think a very major market and occupied 70% in the world. But the other countries, similar like the Southeast Asia and Middle East, even China, right now they invest trillions to build the airport facility. So that should be the major market and the faster growing market. What do you balance? What do you put your resource to different market? What do you think?
Well, I mean, again, the gamma data will tell you that the North American market is the largest market. Whether you're looking at piston product, whether you're looking at jet, turboprop or jet product, or turboprop. I'll put that in aside. Jet products. U.S. is in North America are the largest market, about 70 to 75%. Followed by Europe, then followed by kind of Latin America, and then the rest of the world. And so, we all want to believe that, again, these investments that are being made in emerging markets will follow through. But the challenge is really, you've got to get regulatory approvals and capability for operations. And so long as there's restrictions in those areas, it makes it really hard for the market to grow in a meaningful way. And so you, as a company, particularly as a publicly traded company that has to return value to its shareholders, it needs to keep its eye on the emerging markets and put the right amount of focus, like attending an A-base or maybe having a regionally based show. But it has to keep most of its focus on the markets that are going to continue to yield the growth that investors require.
So I follow my question. In China, we also operate some like big jet, like the Feidong 300. But some rich people, high value people, family, they want to own and operate some big jet. But the problem for them, just like you mentioned, that is how to find the qualified operator. Something is not possible like just like TEXTRON and corporate local safety and qualified operator, and also said that the package is not just a SAG aircraft. It said all this operation to like this family.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to opine on China. I mean, we do that in the U.S. for our owner-operators in Part 91. But no, we don't fashion ourselves as operators of aircraft because of regulatory environments, constraints, and risks. And so, again, you have to look at the ultimate size and opportunity versus what that potential risk would be. And I suspect that that's probably what keeps that from occurring yet. It's not to say it won't happen, so.
Another question.
Yeah.
What was your most challenging sale?
Oh my goodness, let me think.
Maybe you can share a story.
Oh, I have every sale is super challenging. None of them are easy. People want to believe that sales is easy, but they're super challenging. I think a couple, like there are probably three that stand out. My very first sale,
Okay.
which was not, like, when I got my sales territory, they had decided they were gonna kind of divide up territories that already existed. So I had two amazing sales managers that had covered the product in California and Arizona. And they knew that they were gonna lose the territory, so they laid waste and devastation to the territory. They uncovered every single rock before they turned it over to me to get the last sale. And so, like, I'm there, I'm just a newbie, what do I know? So, you know, I was out kind of getting my feet wet in the territory, and my family were gonna move to Scottsdale, that's where we were gonna base out of. And there was a customer in Cottonwood Falls, Arizona, who happened to fly an old Cessna 550. And I just need to start establishing myself. So I'm like, I call them up, Larry Green and Rob Green. Larry's the patriot, Rob was the son. And I'm like, hey Larry, my name's Kriya Shortt. I'm the new sales manager for, like, you know, for Citation in Arizona. I'm not gonna buy it. I'm like, I'm not trying to sell you in anything. I'm not trying to, I just want to get to know you. Could I come up and have lunch with you? And he was in Cottonwood Falls, so it's like about an hour and a half drive. It's a little bit north of Prescott. And so they like, oh yes, you can come on, right? And so I went up and I had lunch with him and Rob, and you know, that was it. That was it. And it, like, you know, you don't expect it to yield anything. But literally, like a couple months later, he's like, yeah, actually, you know what? We're expanding, and you know, maybe you could send us some information on that CJ3. And by the end of that year, I had booked a CJ3 deal with them. And I am confident that my predecessor, because you have a CRM system, had never given this guy the time of day, right? And so, you know, it's improbable, you think it's improbable that they're gonna buy, but he did. So that's probably, I mean, your first sale is always the sweetest.
The sweet.
The most, I don't wanna say it was difficult, but the one that I think was the funniest was, you know, I once got, you know, very rarely do you get like a web lead that's legitimate. Oftentimes you're getting web leads that are like, just not legitimate for a number of reasons. But this guy, his name was Joe Musumeci, and he was flying, what was he flying? A converted Malibu that had been converted into a turboprop. And he had to go from San Diego to Houston because he was in kind of oil and gas support services. So he fills out this web form lead, and I get it, and I follow up on it, and I'm like, this is legit. This guy actually needs our product. So, you know, so we're talking through it, and I think I got the form feed in February. And I think we've done a trip demo for him by probably late March. And like, I kept answering every single one of his questions. And like, we were done answering all of his questions in April. Like, legitimately, like, there were no more questions to be answered. And this guy could not make the decision. And so like, I'm holding his hand while I'm still working my territory from April until like the middle of June. And finally, I'm like, Joe, he finally surfaced one last question, which was around financing. And it was part of this whole kind of economic downturn. So I went back to him with like we should act now because we've come out with this program. And so he had some questions around the program, and I answered all the questions around the program. And he's still hemming and hawing and like, I don't know. And finally, I was like, this guy's he's just scared. He's getting into discomfort. And so I just said, you know, Joe, I said, I know you feel like you're stepping off of a cliff. I said, I promise you've asked all of the right questions. I said, if you feel like you're stepping off the cliff, you don't need to worry, because I'm going to step right there with you and we're going to hold hands the whole way, but you're not going to fall. And like within a week, he had signed the purchase agreement. And so all of that to say, that wasn't ironic. That's pretty normal. But then when we were sitting at the delivery dinner, he says to me, he goes, I just really didn't expect this process to take so long. And I'm thinking, you and me both, buddy. You know? And the hardest wasn't actually the sale, but one of my really good, they've become huge, really good family friends, but I sold a guy an aircraft who was coming out of a TBM into a CJ1 Plus. Which he bought in 1 Plus in the market. So I was actually selling the CJ2 Plus. He was coming to the factory to take delivery of his aircraft. And during the delivery process, we towed the aircraft into the hangar door. And this guy was a high emotion guy. And so that was heartbreaking and hard, but we held the sale together. So, everyone has a story. I think I told my daughter the other day, I think in 4 years, I think I was privileged to sell like 48 aircraft, so.
That's amazing. So I hope it's an easy question.
Yeah.
So who has the best food? Italy, Germany, or Switzerland?
Oh, you know, it's not an easy question because you think it would be an easy question. It's definitely, unless you want Wiener Schnitzel, in my opinion, or bratwurst, it's not Germany. But, you know, Italy has phenomenal food. But here's the thing that I've learned. I'd never been to Slovenia before. Slovenia, has anybody been there? It's a phenomenal country. And it has phenomenal food. So our headquarters for Pipistrel are not in the capital city, which is Ljubljana, which is kind of in the central part of Slovenia, but we're down in what's in Aeronautical, which is right in this valley between kind of where the mountains end and probably about 35 miles from the sea. And so they grow great grapes, and they have phenomenal food, and they have, I feel like per capita they have to have more Michelin-starred restaurants than any place I've ever been to. And I've had the pleasure of eating some of these. I don't like raw fish, so I have to tell them like my idiosyncrasies. I'm like, nothing raw, please. But there are all these little tasting plates where you're not eating very much, but by the end of the night you feel like you've definitely overeaten. So I guess I'd have to say Slovenia, unless you want cacio e pepe pizza, and then you need to go to Italy.
I've never been there, so I mean, it's on my bucket list.
Any last questions?
Any last questions? Well, thank you very
All right,
much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, my
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you all for being here, and have a
Thank you.
nice rest of the day, and stay dry as much as possible.